Just a moment, Mayor, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here.
It just won't go, huh?
It just will not go. Sorry about that. I can't even get it to start. Try it one more time. Okay, it's running, but I'm not hearing the audio.
Sounds like it's playing on your computer, but not on Zoom.
Okay. Do you want me to stop the video?
I guess you should just play it through anyway. People can read it. I mean, the gist of it is that the point is the meeting of the meeting is to conduct the important business of the town, and that we're asking the speakers to follow meeting guidelines that treat everybody with respect and dignity, and that the town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive, hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at our council meetings. We're aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at town council meetings. And if somebody is behaving in a way that's uncivil, we will mute them during this meeting. In person's not relevant. And persons disrupting the council meeting can be cited for a violation of California Penal Code Section 403. Okay, I think everybody has the idea of that, hopefully. Just be respectful and you'll be okay. Next, if we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you. Commissioner Todd Jarvis. Commissioner Steve Piasecki.
I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Joseph Menina.
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Susan Burnett. Commissioner Randy Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Mayer.
Here.
Commissioner Rob Moore.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan Rosenberg. Commissioner Melanie Hansen. Melanie, did you say here?
Yes, here.
Thank you. Commissioner Reza Tavana. Commissioner Jeffrey Barnett.
I'm here.
Commissioner Emily Thomas. Commissioner Catherine Jana,
Here.
Commissioner Kylie Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Steve Raspy,
Yes, here.
Councilmember Sayak,
Here.
Councilmember Hudis,
Here.
Councilmember Badami,
Here.
Vice Mayor Risto,
Here.
Mayor and Chair Rennie.
Here. All right, thank you. So next up will be verbal communications by members of the public would like to address us on only the subject of this meeting tonight. We're not taking items not on tonight's agenda. Tonight's agenda is the nuts and bolts of affordable housing. So would any members of the public wish to address us on this item? Don't see anybody jumping in. So we'll.
Mayor, do you
well,
want to just?
We have one though. Let's Ali Miano. I always say it wrong,
Okay.
sorry. Miano.
Okay, and then you also want to let the audience know that this is their only opportunity to speak?
Yeah, I think you just did.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand it correctly, tonight would be a good night to talk about affordable housing and to speak in favor of the general plan in its current state. So thank you for taking my comment. I speak to you tonight as a member of the Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition and a resident of Los Gatos since 1965. And I want to say that a democratic society doesn't exist only for the rich. And all you have to do is look up at that big blue mountain that I've been looking at, all my life. As my mother drove me to school each day, I would look up at El Sombroso, which you see as you're coming down from Highway 9 into Los Gatos. It's a beautiful mountain. And now I still look up at it every morning as I walk my dog. And increasingly what I see on this once green mountain are these huge, mega homes that stick out like a sore thumb, and they're increasing. And it seems like, the Los Gatos of the last few decades has allowed the mega rich to build indiscriminately, while ignoring the middle and the middle class and the poor. And there's got to be room for everybody in the plan. So I applaud the efforts to address the very unaffordable housing that we have all over our state. But we've got to do all that we can locally to find places for people to live. I don't have to tell you that there are homeless folks in Los Gatos. I don't have to tell you that it's really tough for young people who grew up here to stay here. So please do support the general plan and do support affordable housing in every way possible. And please, do not continue to think of this town, as some of your predecessors have, as Disneyland for the folks who made it big in Silicon Valley. We all got to live here. We all have to live here. And in a democratic society, that doesn't mean just the folks at the top. It means everybody. So please, I can't emphasize enough that I think the plan has really done a good job to try to address everyone's needs. Certainly more has to be done, but it's a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miano. Would anybody else wish to address us on this agenda item? This is your only opportunity this evening. Looks like everybody else is just going to listen. So we'll close public comment and I come back, and I believe the town manager is going to introduce the subject for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. I want to thank our town council, our planning commission, as well as our housing element advisory board for taking time from your busy schedules to join us tonight. Tonight, we're going to focus on the nuts and bolts of affordable housing, talk about the legal framework for housing elements and some of our new laws that we need to follow, as well as talk about the reality of building affordable housing and the financial challenges that come with that. There are some very unique challenges for affordable housing in our communities. I want to welcome and thank several residents who worked with Community Development Director Paulson and I in the development of tonight's program and the questions that you will hear our moderator ask our panelists. I want to recognize Dr. Weissman, Jack Van Ada, Phil Keown, Rick Van Heusen, Lee Fagot for their participation in working with us and inviting panel members to join us. And then, of course, I want to welcome and thank our panel members for taking time from your busy schedules to also join us. As moderator, we have West Valley Community Services Executive Director Josh Cello. Thank you so much for moderating our conversation this evening. We are really happy to have Barbara Couts with Goldfarb Lippman with us. She is a well-known attorney, especially in the planning circles where she's on the conference circuit, helping all of us understand and decode the new laws. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really happy to introduce you to Chris Neal of Core Companies. He has expertise both in affordable housing and market rate development. He's done some very innovative projects and brings great expertise to this topic. I also want to welcome Andrea Osgood with Eden Housing. Many of us know Eden Housing because they're building the affordable senior for the North 40. Thank you, Andrea, for joining us. And then our very own Don Capobres with Harmony Development. Again, really a great community resource around market rate, as well as understanding what it takes to partner with affordable builders to do all of this. So we're going to take about an hour to answer some set questions. Josh will moderate, and then we will open it up to all of our panel, all of the commissioners, council members, and board members to ask questions. And together, the mayor and Josh will moderate the program. So thank you so much. And Josh, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here tonight with all of you and with our town council. Thank you for making the space to have this conversation. We're going to start with a brief introduction of 2 minutes from each of the panel members. Just briefly, Laurel already indicated that I am the Executive Director of West Valley Community Services. We have been working since 1973 to support the West Valley folks who are facing food and housing insecurity. And the town of Los Gatos has been an incredible partner in this work. A shining sample of that was during COVID-19, where we really stood arm in arm to help town residents who were facing the impacts of the COVID crisis. Part of the work we do also is advocating for housing development, and we talk a lot about economically diverse communities. And this is a very challenging conversation, especially in light of a very complicated topic like the housing element. There's a lot of legal aspects that Barbara's going to talk to us a lot about. And there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of laws. This is about our homes, the things we care often most about. In many cases, most of what we have, our liquid assets, are invested in our homes. We're counting on our homes for our retirement in many cases. It's about our values. It's about our future. And so it brings out often the best and maybe not always the best in people when we're talking about things like planning for housing in our communities. We also know that in light of the RENA for the town of Los Gatos, we have to plan for almost 2,000 units. 847 of them are for low and very low income folks. And there's questions about cost and location. What happens if we fall short? How do we deliver a successful housing element? So there's a lot to dig into tonight, and I'm so honored to be with this panel of experts to lead us through all those questions. And to start us off with an introduction, why don't we turn it over to Dawn? You want to kick off?
Sure. Maybe Joel, if I can do slide 2.
and that'll be the only thing I need for the next 2 minutes. Thank you, Josh. My name is Don Capobres, and I'm with Harmony Park Development based in Los Gatos. I know many of you kind of on the screen, and appreciate working with you all. It's my 14th year working on some aspect of the North 40. On the screen, you'll see phase 1. Harmony Park is developing the retail portion of phase 1. Purchased it from Summerhill Homes a couple years ago, and we're excited to be moving forward with the retail piece, and hopefully have some really exciting announcements over the next few months as we progress on that. We're in for building permit. I'm mostly here representing the interests of Grosvenor, who continues to control the development interests on phase 2 of the North, which is outlined, sorry about that, outlined on the screen. It's about 15 acres of the remaining 20 acres. There are, I think, about 6 other property owners on the remaining portion of the North 40. Grosvenor controls the piece that's owned by the Yuki family. And as many of you know, we've embarked on a re-envisioning process for that property, probably about over a year into it now, and look forward to working with the town and community stakeholders as we move forward with that. I do want to thank the community members who were mentioned by town manager early. They've been really asking really good questions, making us think, making me think. And I think because of that dialogue, this should be a really productive session, but also we're all kind of learning about the new laws for housing, for RENA and the housing element. Affordable housing is definitely tough to build, but not just that, but some forms of other market rate housing is really tough to build. So some of that will come out hopefully today. And then the laws are just changing very quickly, and it's a complicated process. I look forward to working with you all. I think our interests should be aligned on getting housing out in town, and hopefully the North 40 can be a bit of that kind of assistance in reaching the RENA goals. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Don. Andrea, would you like to go next?
Sure, happy to. So Andrea Osgood, Senior Vice President of Real Estate Development for Eden Housing. And Eden Housing is a nonprofit affordable housing developer, owner, operator. We're based in Alameda County, but we have properties statewide, and we have developed and now own over 11,000 affordable units. All of those are rental and across the state. So in addition to doing the ground up development, which you see happening on phase 1, and we're really excited to have that project underway and being leased later this year. We also have our own in-house property management company and resident services company that provides supportive services and lots of great things to help our families thrive in the housing that we build. And I know a lot of this meeting was brought forth by community activists, and Eden also has its roots in community activism, where a group of volunteers over 50 years ago came together and really wanted to do something about housing in their community and making room for everyone. And they used to meet at the local IHOP on Mission Boulevard, and now we have over 400 employees that work on this. So just really happy to be here today and kind of share my experiences and Eden's experiences in trying to build affordable housing.
Thanks, Andrea. I really appreciate showing the power of community impact and folks raising their voice. So I appreciate that. Chris, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Josh. Yes, hi. Good evening, Chris Neal. I am so pleased to be here. I was a Los Gatos High School graduate of 1988. So I'm very happy to be back and try to contribute in some small way to a town I love dearly. I grew up at the Los Gatos Swim and Racket Club. I was a pool and tennis rat, so I have nothing but extremely fond memories of my time in Los Gatos. My company, the Core Companies, is a family-owned business. We are a for-profit affordable housing developer. We've been doing it in Santa Clara County and San Mateo County for over 40 years. We've also done some market rate rental housing. We've done affordable home ownership. We've done home ownership. So we've done a lot of different types of projects. I think you have to be diverse and nimble to be able to survive for 40 years in this complex real estate market that is Santa Clara County. And so we're very proud of that. On affordable, we are lucky to have great affordable developers like Eden, Andrea, and many others. And so what CORE's done is tried to kind of distinguish ourselves by bringing unique spins to some affordable projects that we've done. So for example, we've done an affordable housing project in downtown San Jose targeting artists. It's called Art Arc, and that's been very successful. We tried housing for artists, affordable housing, for teachers. And so they were successful affordable housing projects. Unfortunately, teachers made too much money, in air quotes. And so they were over income for the affordable housing, but they still had trouble affording to live in the community. We've combined childcare in some of our affordable housing projects. And we've done a project with an urban farm in Santa Clara, which was really interesting and innovative. And I might touch upon that a little bit later, but I appreciate being invited and I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks, Chris. And yes, we are going to return hopefully to some of your creative affordable housing complexes later in the conversation. Barbara, I'm turning it over to you now.
Hi, well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm Barbara Kautz. I'm a partner at Goldfarb and Lippman, and I primarily represent public agencies. Although we do represent some developers, we represented Summerhill and Grosvenor when they did phase 1. But we primarily represent public agencies, cities and counties, and try to sort out the new housing laws for them and help them implement them. I think I saw one article that said there had been 70 laws passed since 2017 affecting housing. And frankly, even for the attorneys to keep up and to keep them all straight and to understand them has really been a challenge. And it's been more of a challenge for cities and counties to try to implement the new laws. I was a planner and a community development director for 30 years before I became an attorney. And I frankly, I'm glad I'm an attorney now and not a community development director who has to implement all these laws, because it's very difficult and it's constantly changing. I was asked to give a little bit of a introduction about housing elements this cycle and why they're different from past housing elements, and talk a little bit. This seems to have been a constant refrain about what happens if the city doesn't manage to get all the housing built that it's been assigned. So in terms of housing elements in general, the law has changed substantially since the city last adopted its housing element in 2015. Also, HCD is the Department of Housing and Community Development, which reviews all the housing elements. HCD is scrutinizing the housing elements much more carefully, much more strictly, and it's difficult to get the housing elements approved. And just to give you an example, in the SCAG region, the Southern California Association of Governments, which includes Ventura, Orange, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties, where there are 197 jurisdictions, cities and counties. 6 months after the housing element was due, only 7 communities have had their housing elements approved by HCD. Now, I will say that HCD thinks ABAG and our region is doing it better. Partly we have everybody else's example to use, but I'm just using that as a example of how difficult it has been for communities to come up with adequate housing elements. And why is that? There's really 2 main issues. One is cities have been given an allocation of many more units than they had in the past. Los Gatos allocation is about 3 times what it was in 2015. It's gone from 619 units to nearly 2,000 units. And sites have to be found for all those units. And HCD is scrutinizing whether or not those sites are actually developable much more carefully, particularly if the sites aren't vacant. There's another requirement that all cities affirmatively further fair housing, which is abbreviated as AFFH. Sorry, getting way too many acronyms here, but and the city of Los Angeles, although it had plenty of sites, didn't get its adopted housing element approved because HCD felt they weren't doing enough to combat long-standing patterns of segregation. So this is just an example of, of kind of the new world we're living in with housing elements. So what happens? So the city has been assigned an allocation of nearly 2,000 units for the next 8 years for the period between 2023 and 2031. So what happens if all those units aren't built? Well, right now, I will just say that it's not, I don't mean to be a pessimist, although sometimes I'm accused of being a glass half full person. But the numbers that have been assigned, the total numbers, if you look around the state that have been assigned to cities, are really not possible to meet. They amount to about 300,000 units a year. And although the state desperately needs them, since the Great Recession, the production has only rebounded to about 100 or 120,000 a year. It only hit 300,000 a year in the 80s, in the mid 80s. And if anybody's tried to get a contractor, there's just not enough. There's just not enough construction labor, or materials, or contractors to build that many units. So, the state is hoping, we're all hoping, that the housing element will result in a lot more units, but actually reaching the totals, I think, would be very, very difficult and unlikely. The other reason is that, as Josh said, a large proportion of the units, maybe 40 to 50%, are intended for lower income housing. And I was just reading a piece from the California Housing Partnership that said that although California has more than doubled its production of new affordable homes in the past 3 years, the state is still only funding 16% of what it needs to meet its goals. So, without huge infusions of funds from the federal government, right now, there's not enough money for the state to meet all of its ambitious goals for affordable housing. And I don't mean that to discourage people from doing everything they can, but just to be realistic that there's, the capacity right now is limited, which is one reason we have a housing crisis. But what happens if these units aren't built? Well, right now, the only penalty, if you like, is that a city is then eligible for what's called SB 35 review. And what SB 35 does is it allows a developer to build on certain sites. There's a long list of requirements without any kind of public review, basically. Everything has to be approved, what's called ministerially, basically like a building permit, based on only objective standards. And if cities aren't meeting their goals, then developers can propose those projects. And we've been seeing more of those recently. But right now, there aren't any other penalties. I think there's a lot of bad press about cities not meeting their goals and a certain amount of pressure to do something more about it. But right now, that's the only penalty. And I guess we just have to see what happens with the legislature. And so that's my introduction.
Thank you, Barbara. I actually have a follow-up question for you in one moment, but I want to remind everyone listening, all the panelists, that there will be opportunity to ask questions. And so if questions come up, we will have moderated question time for all of you folks to be able to ask the panel. But we've had this great group of residents who have some questions for us to start with. Barbara, you referred to the 7 communities in Southern California who have their housing elements approved by HCD. What can we learn from those approved housing elements that we might want to incorporate into the plan for the town?
Okay, Josh, in full disclosure, I've not reviewed all 7 approved.
High level.
All 7 approved housing elements. You know, I asked HCD what was the problem in the Skag region. And they said, some of these things seem very obvious. They said there were a lot of new consultants who weren't familiar with housing element law. They said they would get comments from HCD and then the elements would come back with no changes. So, you know, there's like kind of follow directions and, you know, read the law and do what you think. But beyond that, as I mentioned, ABAG is providing tremendous support for cities. For instance, on the affirmatively furthering fair housing issue, they put out a 6-page, 5 or 6 page, not very long piece saying, look, if you want to get your housing element approved, you need to analyze it in exactly this way. So I don't mean to be, too just legalistic about it, but sometimes it's just a question of following directions. The other thing, I think, the other big challenge, of course, is finding the sites. And if you have non-vacant sites, HCD wants evidence that those sites will actually be developed, particularly if you use non-vacant sites for more than half of your lower income allocation. So one way is to find out who wants to build and ask developers, you know, are you interested in building? That's one of the best ways. And then trying to make them real. You know, I think what you're doing here, having the development community participate and talk about, you know, what changes would actually result in housing being built, is an actually excellent way to proceed. But I represent a client in Southern California that's been criticized a lot. And they adopted their last housing element quite late and had to get letters really from all the developers whose sites they designated for housing saying they were interested. And something like they have applications for something like 2/3 of those sites. So.
Thank you, Barbara. Don, I want to turn it over to you. Barbara had indicated the large number of affordable units that have to be built as part of this housing element. Can you talk about the various constraints there are to building affordable housing?
Yeah, it's probably going to be a joint team effort on that answer with affordable housing, and specifically, you know, maybe I'll start with just saying developing certain types of market rate housing is difficult in this market, as crazy as that sounds. I don't know if this is the best place to kind of jump into this conversation, but I think there's and this stuff is complicated. I think there's a common belief that just providing density to the developer, and let's just get specific. Hey, what if we gave the North 40 500 units? What could you guys do? 20% of 500 would be 100 units. Can we get 100 units, affordable units on the North 40? It's kind of like that's the number that the conversation is focused on. And the economics of, and maybe I will jump to a slide 13 or maybe 12, Joel, on the screen. The economics of actually delivering to get 500 units on the 15 acres that we control. I don't know what that is. Just do quick math on that. What is that? It's like over 30 dwelling units per acre. If you go to slide 13, the housing that's being built on the North 40 right now is 20 units per acre, and that's a townhome type product. To get 500 units on the North 40, you would have to do it on the parcels that we control. You would have to build it on all 15, and you'd have to get over 30 units per acre, which means you would have to implement kind of a building typology that's on the screen now, which is a podium type building. And these images are from your general plan 2040 update, and they're typically 5 or 6 stories tall. The short answer right now is with traditional financing and with rents in West Silicon Valley at maybe $4 a square foot, we could not get this financed today. So even if you gave us a blank check or just the golden key to Los Gatos to develop 500 units on the North 40, we'd have a really hard time getting there because we couldn't implement this type of building. The most economical building or feasible residential to build right now is something that does not require structured parking. And that would be the types of housing that you see being constructed on the first phase of the North 40, which you call townhomes. So that's the challenge of just getting market rate to work, let alone kind of having the affordable housing piece work. In terms of percentages, it's no surprise that 15 to 20%, typically 15% affordable is the requirement in most Bay Area municipalities. And that's generally where the math works out, where the market rate developer can deliver affordable 15 to 20% of units as affordable. I know previous housing, this is my third housing element cycle in Los Gatos. And I know one of the challenges that we had the last cycle was there's a site, Los Gatos Lodge site, that the town wanted 80% affordable. Now that sounds great. That sounds like a really good, goal to have, but at the end of the day, no developer stepped up because you can't have that high of affordability and make a project pencil without major subsidies. So I think I'll stop there and maybe other panelists can kind of jump in.
Yeah, if Chris, Andrea, or Barbara want to add to that answer regarding the challenges maybe of affordable housing. Andrea, you came off mute.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously building affordable housing is very challenging, but I think you're seeing in phase 1 where we are able to kind of piece together opportunities that work. And so for us, we do a lot of this kind of inclusionary partnership where we end up getting free land, which is incredibly valuable because once we have the land and entitlements, I call that the golden ticket, where we can go and leverage other funding sources, either at the county level, the state level, and of course the federal level. And the federal level program that we have been using and loving since 1986 is the low income housing tax credit. So it's a really great program. So we're able to, with that free land, which is often driven by an inclusionary ordinance or a BMP program, as you call it in the town, really does set us up to be able to deliver really hard to build affordable units because we can leverage those other programs.
To what extent have Measure A funds also been helpful with building affordable housing?
Extremely. I think in the industry, we've had to learn how to deal with the new reality that does not involve redevelopment agencies. And so really for me, the big shift used to be that redevelopment agencies in various cities would secure sites and then say to our community, we would like to build affordable housing here. And once we lost those, we really lost that land assemblage function. And the industry has really been looking to the Edens, the nonprofits, the cores of the world to secure their own development opportunities. And I will tell you, that's a scary thing for my board. It's like a new thing. And we do that very cautiously in places where we know there's local funding. And so we did buy a couple of sites in San Jose and Mountain View once the Measure A money became available, or we knew it was going to happen because we felt like there was an execution there that could work. And I think Chris could probably add his own perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, really not much more to add, Josh. If it wasn't for Measure A, I don't think much affordable housing in the last 5 years would have gotten built in Santa Clara County.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Actually, don't take yourself on mute. I want to follow up with you about one of your creative affordable housing or mixed housing developments, which is the Aggro Hood. And I looked it up online. 50%, and correct me if I'm wrong, 50% BMR units, 1.7 acres of urban farm and open space, talk to us about this development, how it came about, and if this kind of thing could also work in Los Gatos.
A great question, Josh. And we're very proud of it. It started with the city had the land, right? Redevelopment had gone away, so they had a land. They had the desire to get affordable housing, but they had no money. And the history of the site, so there was a very engaged community, and the history site was it was a former agricultural site tied to UC Davis. So that was sort of the history of the site. And so, I'd say there was a robust community outreach process. We were selected in 2015. We just broke ground on it this year, and people won't be moving in until 2024, right? So, it's 9 years from when we were selected to people moving in. So it took a very, very long time. But so I'd say the genesis of it was, the city wanted some community benefit at the center of the project. The community, given the history of the site, there was some community driving towards, they wanted to see a farm. Could it be possible? And so we worked with the community. What I say, we kind of stole their idea. And so the central feature of the project is, as you mentioned, a 1.5 acre urban farm. Of that, I think about 10,000 square feet is actually farmed, where we have a professional farmer, Farmscape, that will run programs, provide education, and really produce fresh produce that'll benefit both all the residents within the community as well as some nearby residents. I think with tied to the affordable housing, what's really interesting is, housing affordability is difficult, but also when, your paycheck is almost all going towards your rent, access to healthy foods is a challenge. So providing healthy foods to low-income seniors was a big plus. The sustainability of the project. So it was in many ways the right project at the right time. I'd say the key to it was, as a scarce public resource, the goal was to try to provide as much housing for the broadest range of city residents. And so that's why it ended up, there's an affordable, 50 units, 50% is roughly affordable. That's a senior project with AMIs from 30% AMI all the way up to 60%. We have project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority. We have funding commitment from the city and the county Measure A. And then, as Andrea mentioned, we have tax credits and bonds. And so, once we got the golden ticket, we applied, got that financing in place. We have what we call the mixed income project, which is 160 units of rental housing. 10% we're targeting households at 120% AMI or below. Right, so still folks who are struggling for stable housing in the area. So that was kind of trying to target another slice of community incomes. Market rate apartments, and then there's 36 townhomes. Right, so those were really intended to be on a lower price point in Santa Clara. First time home buyer. That being said, given the price of housing in Santa Clara County, it's still going to be $1.2 to $1.5 million housing, but it was trying to use the city resource to benefit as many residents of the city as possible. And so, right, the key is the city land, the city contributing the land and the money. I'll be honest, it took some vision and some courage on our part to pull it all together and be innovative with it. The robust community outreach was critical. We probably spent 2 years through that process to understand what was wanted and then what could be delivered. And right, we couldn't deliver everything that was wanted, and that was the challenge, right? There's always more things that was wanted. And so I think it took leadership from city staff and the elected officials to be able to understand both sides and say, okay, that works, enough. And so it was how many units, how many were going to be affordable, how much commercial. So, everyone wanted something else on the project and you just couldn't fit it all in. And so without the leadership of the mayor and the city council, I think that was a key part to the process. And then I think also finding, Farmscape, I think a world-class urban farmer, I don't know if I mentioned they operate the farm at Levi Stadium. They operate the farm at Oracle Park. This is what they do and they're professionals at it. So those were all the elements that kind of came together that kind of gave birth to the Aggro Hood.
I have to say, I find remarkable the thoughtfulness of co-locating farming for development for folks who are spending the bulk of their monthly assets on their rent. We see that a lot at West Valley Community Services. Folks don't have any money left at the end of the month, and they need to buy food. So what an interesting and really thoughtful approach to the complex. A couple themes for me are elevating from our speakers so far. This golden ticket of gifts of land, a really diverse funding structure, the leadership of elected officials and leaders in the community, and that these projects take time to develop. I want to turn back to Barbara for a second, because I think for me, one of the complications of the housing element process is all the laws. And I find it very complicated not being a lawyer. So can you explain for us, Barbara, the concept of no net loss and how this has implications for our housing element process?
No, I mean, the main implication, if I just, before explaining what this is that you really need to designate more sites as suitable for lower income housing than your assigned number. But let me explain no net loss. What no net loss means is that if you show a site in the housing element and you say, this site should be able to accommodate 100 low income units, but then a developer comes in and provides only 15% lower income units, but perhaps what the city's BMP program requires, then you've essentially lost 85 units that the city had designated for lower income housing. So people have said, well, should we put an overlay zone or something on it and require that 100% of the units be lower income? HCD will not let you do that anymore. The city right now has quite high percentages, 40% lower income or something, unless you can show that you have enough resources and incentives and money, in this case, probably in this case, to subsidize those units and to make that feasible. Now, the city probably has, the town probably has enough resources to subsidize some projects, but probably, very unlikely for all 800 some units. And so essentially, as these sites get developed, you keep losing your inventory. The community I talked about where I thought 2/3 of the sites were developed. Most of the developers in that community are providing about 20% lower income housing. And the city designated twice as many sites as they needed for lower income housing, but they're pretty close to running out of their sites. And at that point, you have to upzone additional sites. So this concept is easier to explain with a little graphic, but basically, if a site's designated as suitable for lower income housing, and it's developed, but not all with lower income housing, then you have to make up those units somewhere. This is different from when the North 40 was approved. At the time the North 40 was approved, you only had to match the number of units in the that were in your housing element. If it was designated for 100 lower income units, you only had to build 100 units, and then this didn't kick in, but they've changed it to say that it also has to meet the income, whatever the income designation was, or you have to make sure that there are other sites to make up what's lost.
Thank you, Barbara. Even without a graphic, I feel like I have a much better understanding of it now. I appreciate that definition. Don, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think I noticed this on the slide you shared, but I want to make sure we all heard it. What's your estimate as to what an acre of land costs in the town?
Yeah, so it depends. There's not depends on what you're building out there. And let me pull that up so I can refer to the numbers. And Joel, if you want, we can pull that slide back up so people can look at it. And I always think we all had a little bit of debate on whether or not we want to share these. But in the spirit of transparency and just providing as much information as we can, I'm going to go through these numbers. Oh, not that one. Sorry. So it'd be slide 12. So, and maybe this will drive it home. So the townhomes that are being built on the North 40 right now, phase 1. So this is what we call townhome. I realize sometimes we use terminology that folks don't typically use. So townhome to a developer, townhome style development or building is really made out of wood. The building is all part of the building. It's kind of tucked under on the first floor. There's no structured parking at all. These are typically 3 stories tall and, like I said, made out of wood. In this case, if you kind of go through all the kind of financials at the end of the day, the land value, if you're just developing, so not taking into account building the massive infrastructure that might need to be built for a big project or the parks or anything like that, but just buying a parcel in the North 40 and building townhomes, the land value can be $10 to $12 million per acre, which is pretty significant, I realize. Go to the next slide. The point I was trying to make about going up in density, and that's like a 20 unit per acre kind of density. You go to the next building type, which is, we call it 5/1 or a podium style development, where we introduce some type of structured parking, usually beneath the residential, but could be a standalone parking garage, off to the side. The biggest issue here, if I don't want to keep going back and forth between the 2 slides, but let's just say the cost to construct the actual residential units are relatively the same, but you're going to add $30,000 per parking stall to build that parking structure. And so the total cost per unit for that type of building gets up to over $700,000 all in. And I don't want to get too far into the details here, but this in a rental project, in today's rent in West Silicon Valley, we're between $3.70 and $4 a square foot. The value of that apartment building unit is about $664,000 with a total cost, I said, of $700,000. No one's going to finance that deal. You're barely breaking even. The land value in that case, in the current market for these types of buildings, is 0 per acre. Now, if these projects take a long time. I'm on year 14 of the North 40. So if you assume at some point in time rent's going to increase, which we're looking at, maybe rent in the next 5 years gets to $5.25 a foot, then the value of those units turn into $942,000 per unit. Assuming construction costs stay the same, maybe you can get to $1.5 million per acre on let me make sure I get that right. $5 to $7 million per acre. Again, less than half of what a townhome would get. The next example we show here is a for sale type project with the same structured parking. So it's all about the cost of building structured parking, which makes density very, very difficult to implement projects like this, especially in it's not a very transit-rich area, the North 40 or even Los Gatos in general. There's no mass transit. We're generally, hemmed in by, the freeways, where maybe we have a bus line out there. So even if we, cities like San Francisco, Oakland are going to rules where developers can't build any parking. We can't do that in West Silicon Valley. We can't do that in Los Gatos because we don't have, it's not, the walkability, and we definitely don't have the transit ability. The affordable housing issue for me comes down to transit and trying to build less parking garages for less cars is kind of where it's at. We do half of the time at work doing parking lot mathematics.
That sounds hard. Parking lot
value
mathematics.
per acre will depend on what we're building. And we know from what we've heard in the community, we know it'd be difficult to do just a whole, gigantic townhome project on phase 2. So we're trying to find creative ways to put a mix of uses together that allows us to, make the project feasible and move forward. And we're happy to be working with Eden Housing and donating land again to them to do what they do best.
I'm glad you mentioned the transportation challenges, Don, because I know throughout the West Valley, this is one of the big challenges. We live in a bit of a public transportation desert, and it must make your job even harder.
For sure.
Yeah. I want to pull back to something that Chris had mentioned, and I'm going to direct this to Andrea and Chris. Maybe Andrea will start with you. Chris had mentioned both affordable units that are rented and affordable units that can be purchased. Can you talk about how both of those might fit into an affordable housing development strategy, purchase versus rental? Andrea, why don't you go first?
Sure. I mean, Eden years ago did home ownership development, but we haven't in many years. So I don't have a lot of experience there, but I think in general, my answer to different housing types is yes, because we need it all. We need all of those in the ecosystem. I think the best way to deliver affordable home ownership is going to be through programs that look a lot like your BMP program, where it's a part of a larger home ownership development. But you need to recognize that those are likely going to be higher AMIs, so more in the 80 to 120% AMI. And then for affordable rental housing, especially if you allow for offsite, like we're doing at the North 40, where, like a standalone affordable housing development, like somebody like in Eden, the benefit of that is that we really can leverage all those other programs that I talked about before at the county, state, and federal level to get deeper affordability. I think the real challenge with affordable home ownership, if you're not kind of like cross-subsidizing with a larger development, is that there's just not a lot of programs at any level of government that support, there are subsidies that support that kind of development. I'll let Chris add anything.
Yeah, I guess, and Don mentioned it, and you'll hear it a lot tonight. The answer to many of these questions is it depends. And so I think the starting point is, what is the goal? What are you trying to do? There's a whole conversation about equity and home ownership. So if that's your goal, it can be done. But as Andrea mentioned, the dollar stretch is much further doing tax credit affordable rental. So if your goal is a lot of affordable housing, AMIs 60% and below, the only way, you have all these different layered financing, that's the way to go. So I think the answer is really, it depends. You have to know what the objective is, and then you can know, does a home ownership project fit in the goal? But generally speaking, it doesn't. You don't get a lot of projects out of it. And if you ask a home builder to include one, the amount of subsidy or the opportunity cost that goes in that one unit is extraordinary. And so you're housing one household who wins the lottery. Like if you think affordable housing developer gets a golden ticket, one homeowner would you might take $1 million, $1.5 million. But if the goal is you want to get one household in and create some equity, it might be the right answer to the goal. My last comment, and I'll pass it off to Don. I see Don wants to speak, is Eden and Core are working together in a county to do a project, and we're doing a large family project. We're doing an affordable senior project, both rental, and we're doing an affordable homeownership project. And the only reason that's happening is because the public agency is contributing the land to it, and the public agency is putting millions of dollars into the project, because when they started, that was a goal that they really wanted. They wanted homeownership for certain AMIs, and they're really trying, I think they're pursuing, part of the goal is about social equity. So, I think it can happen, but it takes a lot more subsidy to finance affordable homeownership.
Don, you want to jump in?
It was a great answer. He picked up what I was going to bring up. Thank you.
I was just going to add that with density bonuses, some developers in condo projects are often proposing very low income or low income home ownership. And the difficulty there is that the homeowners then can't always keep up with the HOA dues. even though the original price is set to accommodate those dues, they often go up faster than inflation. You know, and then if there's an assessment, so some of our clients, our city clients, require some kind of a fund to be set up by the developer, you know, that could be used in those in the event, but it's very hard to predict, you know, how large should the fund be? Nobody really knows. And it's been a problem. We found the most successful homeownership programs for lower income households are those run by groups like Habitat, which provide zero interest loans and a lot of support, or some of the self-help housing groups, particularly in the Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley, but I'm not sure any of that would be feasible in the Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Barbara, let's keep it with you for a moment. Actually, I have another sort of procedure policy question. Are there any implications if the town identifies more than 50% of the RHNA allocation from non-vacant sites?
If more than, well, it's more than 50% of the lower income.
Okay.
Okay, only if more than 50% of the lower income allocation is demonstrated from on non-vacant sites. And there's HCD has a very strict definition of what's vacant, like a lot with a dilapidated vacant house is not considered to be vacant. Anyway, then the use is proposed, this site's existing use is presumed to impede additional residential development unless you have substantial evidence that the use is likely to be discontinued during the planning period. So it's a much higher burden to justify those sites. You have to, for each site, you have to have some kind of evidence that it's likely to be developed within the planning period. They have a list of what evidence. One is a letter from the property owner saying they're interested in building it. Another is there's a development agreement to develop the site. Well, that would be great. Or the building's dilapidated, the structure is likely to be removed. I found generally it's difficult, it's hard to get enough evidence for those non-vacant sites if you're relying on them for more than half of your low-income RHNA.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to open up the next question to the whole panel, but maybe Don, we'll start with you. Are there any policy tools you'd recommend the town implement to incentivize the development of affordable housing?
The town's BMP policy right now is 100% inclusionary. I think considering standalone affordable housing, some of the affordable housing requirement to be satisfied in one building would be helpful for all the reasons that have already been stated. The resources to a group like Eden are just so much more, and we can leverage so much more if we can focus on a parcel. And this is probably only for larger, projects like the North 40, but we can kind of leverage our land donation to Eden to get more units that way. So I think that's probably one thing that we would suggest the town taking a look at.
Thanks, Don. Other folks on the panel?
Okay, I'll keep going.
I have an idea. I'll go. Allowing linkage fees or commercial linkage fees, residential linkage fees, especially for those smaller projects, like over time they can add up. And then if you happen to combine that with like a town-owned piece of dirt, you could do something like the strategy that Chris talked about that he did for Aggro Hood, right? So city-owned land plus city fees, town in this case.
And Josh, just to add one more, I think, right, so flexibility in land use. So I think, an affordable housing overlay that provides flexibility. It could, the land could go forward as it's currently designated, but it also could go forward as affordable housing. That gives some flexibility on potential sites. Fee waivers Many cities waive some of their building taxes. We have some cities that waive all or part of their park fees, right? So ideally, from a city, funding dollars are helpful, but waiving fees are, in many ways works the same way. So that is very helpful. And then anything that the city could do to help facilitate the processing of the approvals, whether it's just aligning their policy so a project can take advantage of some of the recent state laws that have been enacted to help entitlements process more quickly.
Yeah, and I would just support what really has been said already. I mean, another thing is cities using their own land for the affordable, if there's any land that could be declared surplus or that could be used, that's another. And I just wanted to second what Andrea said about fees on smaller projects and commercial fees. Usually projects need to have some kind of substantial city support or town support in order to get tax credits. Unless a developer is donating the land. And how do you get that fund? And so that's really what the issue is. The cities we've seen that have been most successful have some kind of a funding source. And then of course there's local bond issues.
Don, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's probably capture what I was going to say in a further question. Thank you.
Josh, one thing to add is, right, I think surplus is in the eye of the beholder, right? There's some cities that have parking lots that are deemed used, and it doesn't work all the time, but sometimes the project could replace the parking for so the jurisdiction still gets its parking or its use, but then you get the affordable housing above it, right? So surplus land is not just necessarily empty land that's not being used. Sometimes you could replace an existing use if it's been used at a low efficiency.
Thank you. And in a few minutes, we're going to turn over the discussion to the mayor to take questions from the audience. I just have one or two more questions based on our timing. One of the things we hear often when talking about affordable housing, and given the density of the affordable housing in the RENA, I want to make sure we bring up is concerns about things like safety, like how the housing will fit in with the community, with traffic. Can any of our other folks on the panel have experience with developing affordable housing really talk about those concerns and how those are not, how those play out in this conversation about affordable housing development? Chris, want to go first?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think about traffic, many times what creates traffic is the lack of affordable housing in the area, right? So for our quality of lives, we have childcare needs, people who help with our children, sports coaches, all different types of people who help us both work, play, and live in the valley. And the challenge is most of those people can't afford to live in our community. So they're driving a long way, they're driving through town to get there. So I think by creating the right types of ranges of affordable housing within the community, it could actually reduce the traffic, fewer cars on the road, because it's putting the people near where they're working, right? Whether it's retail workers, retail managers, office, some lower paying office workers. When you get up to 60% AMI for a 2-bedroom household, there are households making $60,000, $80,000 a year. So those are working families. And so rather than driving a long distance to provide the services in a community, if you have the housing in the area, it's a great way to actually reduce traffic.
Thanks, Chris. Other folks on the panel want to jump in? Barbara?
Despite all the fears of affordable housing, we actually don't hear that very much about. Is that what you're talking about? About an affordable project creating various problems. I think the Bay Area is very lucky to have a lot of very experienced affordable developers who do a great job managing their project, like Eden. And there's a number of,
Thank
of
you, Barbara.
yeah. I mean that seriously as a shout out, because the kind of the kind of fears you hear about affordable housing, I rarely hear about them being, actualized, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, I would agree. And we certainly hear it a lot, and I'm used to the question. But I think first and foremost, Eden prides ourselves, and we're not alone. We have a lot of great actors, including CORE and others, who really focus on building a great product that looks good, and then being a good long-term neighbor. So that's all about operations and taking care of who lives there. And I'll tell you, like, for many of our residents, all of them, having a safe home is their top goal, and they want to keep it. They want to say, be a part of the community and make sure that they're not going to lose that. And they take it really, really seriously, especially in some of these higher resource areas like Los Gatos. We had a project that we did in Palo Alto several years ago, and it is an amazing place. And I will tell you that our residents work really hard to make sure they follow all of the rules, because it's just a great place to be. Your zip code really does dictate outcomes for families, health outcomes, education outcomes. And so people take it really seriously. They really, they see it as like they are part of your community. They want to be there, and they want to be good neighbors, just like we do.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea, and all of our panelists. Now, I saw some hands start to go up, and I know you all probably have questions. So Mayor Rennie, I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate conversation with the folks in the audience who have more questions.
All right, thank you. Let me start off with my own question. I've been adding a lot of these pieces together, and I feel like we're in a very tight box. I really heard Andrea say, you got to start with somebody donating land. And if we really want to get it done in Los Gatos, the town needs to donate the land. Well, we don't have a lot of resources to go buy land. We have about $3 million available for subsidizing or buying land or something. That doesn't get us anywhere. We do have some parking lots, but I heard Don say podium style doesn't work so well, right? If we donate a parking lot behind our downtown buildings, we need the parking back, plus the parking for whatever you build above it. So he's got to have, a podium style down a couple levels probably to account for lost parking plus parking for the new one. And so then I go to what, that kind of says, well, I don't think it's going to be really tough to get an all affordable type project. And I go to what Barbara says, I keep adding the pieces together here. Barbara says HCD is probably not going to let us go above 20% affordable on a designated site unless we have the resources. And we don't have the resources. Looks like it might even be hard to donate the land if it's a parking lot. And so what that says is to get, we should be expecting HCD to force us into a housing element in order to cover our 800 and change of the low and very low. We actually need to build, and they're only going to let us put 20% affordable on those sites, adding up to that 800 and something. So if I multiply by 5, now we're talking about HCD expecting us to find sites for over 4,000 units, up to 4,500 units, just to get our 800 units in the very low and low income covered. So my question is, where is my math wrong? Are we not, what am I not adding up, and how do we not end up with the result that I just said?
Formally, HCD, at least in your housing element, can't require you to designate more sites for lower income housing, than you've been assigned. They recommend, I think, a 20 or 30% buffer. So they're not demanding that you designate 4,000 units. I think it puts a huge premium, though, on the ability to actually do a real affordable, 100% affordable housing project. So I think the cities are really going to be competing to get some of those projects because it's the only way they can begin to meet their allocation.
And so then let me go ask Dawn to comment on my comment about the trying to use a parking lot and now needing some kind of podium. Is that going to pencil out? If we're giving you the land, but now we're asking you to rebuild all that parking plus the affordable.
Yeah, and I don't want to be that guy. I'd love the opportunity, but the answer, Mayor, is no. I don't think it'd be feasible today with the rent structure that we're looking at. And in that case, you're definitely building a very complicated parking structure. So
Yes,
that's
but Dawn's not going to do that. I think that's true. But that is where we specialize, Chris and I, in the weird stuff, the hard stuff. So I know there's a couple of examples out there, and I can, forward more. But I'm pretty sure downtown San Mateo, there's a mid-pen project that just got started on 2 city-owned parcels that were parking lots that they're going to be replacing. A bunch of parking over by the railroads there. Sort of ironically, I know I talked about the donated land. It's not required, but it's definitely one of the easier things. But we have gone out and bought land where we know that the underlying zoning is there. So I want to just clarify that. But kind of going back to the parking lot or parking podiums, because our deals never really pencil, right? Because we're already starting with really the same high construction costs that Dawn has, and even lower rents. Everyone expects that we need subsidies, and there's lots of different subsidy programs out there. So oftentimes we can build a podium building where the market might not otherwise, but there might be public interest reasons to do that, right? So you create opportunities for lower income housing. And you can leverage, state programs to really help us build that denser housing that the market might not otherwise build. So.
And Dawn, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Andrea, just to maybe turn this a little bit into a free flow here. I mean, isn't the situation potentially on the North 40 where we're donating land to you the same as the town donating land to you? Can't you potentially get to a higher density if you would need help from the town?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting help from you, thank you, and Summerhill and Grosvenor on that one. But I think we're happy to take help, there's different avenues to get the help that we need to make a denser project work. So sometimes it's the locals, sometimes it's the county, sometimes it's the state.
And let me ask about the financing then. It feels to me like Los Gatos is at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to getting the financing to build these things. All the projects are occurring in the larger cities like Mountain View and Sunnyvale and San Jose. And it seems that, how are the small cities like Los Gatos or Los Altos or Saratoga, how are we going to compete for, I think I heard the statistic, 16% of the needed affordable housing has funding out there, right? So we're trying to compete to build a project where it seems like we're not very competitive.
I think step one, and that's really where the housing element is about laying the foundation of available properties, right? So creating the zoning that would allow for a housing project to move forward. Because if that zoning isn't there, we can't take that chance as developers to, especially as a nonprofit affordable developer, the risk of trying to buy a site and then get a general plan amendment to build what you want is too much, right? So that's, I think, really what HCD is trying to do, is to create enough opportunities such that it creates an environment where a deal is possible, right? Because the housing element is about planning for housing. It's not about financing it and building it.
Yeah, let me go. I've asked 3 in a row. Let me go to Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you so much. This is very useful and informative. But just wanted to follow up on the parking question. We're talking about parking, or I'm hearing you talking about parking. And I know that that's a challenge in Los Gatos, but is there a possibility that there can be a zero parking requirement given a certain location or amenities that might be nearby? I mean, would it be acceptable to have the town in the housing element perhaps specify areas that have been identified where we can eliminate parking? So that takes away perhaps one of the barriers to affordable development.
Chris, you want to take that one? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends, right? If it's well located, so I think senior housing near all the amenities, right? So we did a project where it was a retail center where there was a grocery store, there was a CVS and there was a corner retail site that just wasn't moving forward. We developed low parking ratio affordable housing for seniors, and it worked very, very well because they didn't really need it happened to be on the bus line as well. So I think in cases like that, Councilwoman Janoff, I think it can work well. In the case of shared parking, I think the mayor is right in the sense of the parking lot land where it's 80% market rate and 20% affordable doesn't work, but 100% affordable may work, right? There's another project in Burlingame that's going along the same way. And in some cases, what we've done is you've ended up with if the circumstances aligned, where you have shared parking, right? If the tenant population is off at work during the day and only need it in the evening, but then the parking is mostly needed during the day and not in the evening, we've been able to park it at lower ratios because there's a certain amount of parking that can be shared. So I think you're spot on. There are different strategies and locations where the right locations and circumstances can support a significantly lower parking ratio.
And if I may, just to follow up, Mayor, Andrea, in your developments, do you ever consider including the amenity of having transportation service, a bus or drivers that support the residents of your affordable housing units?
Sure. We have done transit passes, but like a shuttle service generally is too expensive for us to cover long term. But we also, just to answer your previous question, we're about to start construction on a project in downtown San Rafael, which is a collaboration with a local senior services group that's going to have zero parking for the seniors. So they'll be able to live on site. There's going to be great health services and an active aging center on the ground floor, but no parking. So I think that's going to be very successful and probably a similar kind of environment in Marin as in Los Gatos.
It looks like Dawn wants to jump in and help answer.
I mean, I think it'd be to answer the question directly and specifically to the North 40, I think it would be challenging. Not only would we have kind of a marketing issue in terms of renting or selling. I ran into a situation in a multifamily, an apartment building in Washington, D.C. that was close to transit in a very urban environment where our construction lender and us got into a debate because we were trying to reduce the parking ratio. So it would also be a conversation with, get the lenders getting comfortable with zero parking, especially in a suburban environment. So I think it's not a slam dunk for sure.
I was going to say that legally, the developer can ask for a waiver of the parking standards under the density bonus law if it's got as little as 5% very low income housing. So it's possible, if someone feels it is marketable, I think that's really what the issue is, and serves the needs of the people living there. It's possible to basically require a city to waive its parking standards by providing a relatively small amount of housing, of affordable housing.
Okay, let's go to Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. It sounds like there's a bunch of competing issues around reducing parking because, what I've heard, like the Aggro Hood the conversation about those affordable houses were senior. And it seems to me that on the North 40 with the senior housing, the parking requirements can be lower with senior housing than family housing. So that then tends to drive the affordable, where you're trying to get away from the cost of parking towards senior. But then I'm wondering, how well does that work with shared parking? Because if there's the assumption that seniors only need, one car for every 2 units or something, that then sounds like they're not leaving to go to work. And so is there a trade-off there with shared parking if you do senior?
I think that's reasonable, and I would want to, do a parking study or analysis of any specific. But yes, I would agree that some of our seniors work, but many don't.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hanson?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the line of questioning that the mayor was asking. If I'm kind of thinking things through, and when the North 40 was in process, I had actually called up Eden Housing at the time to try and understand the economics of how this thing would work. And so I'm not seeing a scenario where Los Gatos could feasibly build 840 some units of low income housing without partnering with somebody like Eden. So my question is there a scenario where we didn't partner with somebody like Eden that is viable, and where would the funding come from?
I'm sure you could partner with Chris and CORE. There's a lot of, other organizations that do this work. I don't know if you're specifically targeted to Eden or partnering with a developer like us.
It could be one. It could be one like you. What maybe saying it another way is, I don't see any scenario where we work exclusively with a market rate developer without having somebody like you involved, because I don't see where the numbers comes from. And so I'm asking the question: am I thinking about this correctly, or is there some other solution out there that I haven't heard of yet?
Yeah, I think it's like it's going to be like a bunch of different solutions in the end, right? Like, so you might get 100% affordable housing development that you do in partnership with a group like CORE or Eden. It might be that you provide the zoning and somebody like a Grosvenor or Summerhill comes in and wants to do another larger development, and they're incorporating more affordable units as part of that. I think it's just the housing element process again is about building that foundation and creating a lot of different ways that things can happen, because one solution is not going to get you there.
Okay, I think that answers my question. Thank you.
And Dawn, you wanted to add to that?
We're working on, other projects in the Bay Area, and I don't, working with groups like Eden is the best way to leverage and get as much affordable housing. Relying on the developer to do 100% inclusionary, even though we believe in that, there's the equity issues that are really important that Chris brought up, and I think we can't ignore that. But I think we found that you really do need to partner with affordable housing developer.
Okay, so just to sum up, what I'm hearing is that my thinking was correct. Is there's a very symbiotic relationship between the nonprofit, affordable housing developer and a market rate developer, that when you put the two together, makes the solution come out with, the right levels of affordable housing because of tax credits and all these other things that are in there. So, thank you.
And Chris, you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the only thing I wanted to add was, I think as part of the housing element, if the planning documents demonstrate that there are more opportunity sites that could be available for single projects that would be 100% affordable, I think you would get a lot more developers coming in, like an Eden, CORE or others, inquiring about acquiring a site or moving forward with a site as just a standalone 100% affordable project on its own. It's these unique large sites where, Dawn and Harmony took the risk and put together the vision, It's those large sites where you end up with the market rate and the affordable developer who work together and try to, how do you accommodate the goals and blend them together? But those are more unique. But I think the goal is in this planning process, if they could be identified more sites that could be eligible, I would anticipate the city would have more conversations with standalone affordable housing developers inquiring about developing 100% affordable on a site.
And so if I could take this to Barbara for a second. So does the summary of this mean our housing element plan is going to need some kind of program plan where we're going to work on one of our sites or two of our sites with an Eden or one of these other types? Is HCD savvy enough to realize they're going to require us to figure that out, that kind of relationship to figure out? Because basically we're figuring it out that that's the only way we're going to get there. Or are they going to be requiring something of this sort, and what would it look like in our housing element?
Yeah, I don't think your housing element has to get into great detail about how you would partner with somebody, but one of the things that's supposed to be considered in the housing element is public land that might be used. So if the city said, hey, we've got these sites and we intend to partner with an affordable housing developer, and here's some funds or something we can put into it, I don't think the housing element itself needs to be much more detailed than that. I don't always know, because the HCD often writes letters asking for more details, but it's hard to predict. I mean, I think generally just specifying the site, talking about, the city's contact, that you've held this meeting, that's something more than most cities have done or towns have done. And that you have these relationships with CORE and with Eden and with so forth, and you're intending to, leverage those relationships and get something built.
And so if I could just continue on that a little bit, they're going to require us to specify certain sites. And I believe we're going to have to specify, we think we're going to get 20% or 30% or something on those sites. But in of those sites might turn into an all affordable based on figuring out some partnership, but we don't know what that is because we haven't figured out with our partner what's the best site. Can we do, how specific to site does it need to be, or can we say somewhere in this mix we're going to turn into 100% affordable?
You have to designate every site as either suitable for lower, moderate, or above moderate income housing. But until there's a development approved on the site, if it's suitable for lower income housing, which in Los Gatos generally means 20 units an acre. So if it's suitable for lower income housing, you can claim 100% of the capacity to help meet your 800 unit RENA until the project's actually approved.
And in order to do that, we have to show some kind of relationship in the works with somebody that'll help us make it happen, basically.
No. It's a little bit of a weird. It's a little bit odd the way the way it is. You don't have to show for each site that you have enough money to build 887 units, right? Because you don't. Nobody does. You have to show that you have sites that could accommodate whatever the number is, the 800 plus units. And they have to be zoned properly and have development standards that would actually allow somebody to build the number of units you're providing. But for each site, you do not need to show that you have, the resources to actually construct the housing on the site.
Well, so this seems inconsistent with what you told us in early on, that HCD won't allow us to put a higher percentage on a site than we have resources to make happen beyond 20 or 25%.
The issue is if you require the units, if you require a higher percentage of units.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Let me go to Commissioner Rosenberg.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to say to the developers, this is great. I'm so happy you guys are on here. This is definitely the perspective I personally wanted to hear. I have a question about the sort of mixed use developments, like, retail with housing. How does that change the equation as it relates to affordable housing? Is it even harder to do, or does it make it easier because, you have the parking that's kind of, retail parking back and forth where people aren't parking there all the time? And then kind of a related question, how does that look worse, rental versus ownership? So if you're doing a mixed use housing, is it easier to do, and you want some affordable, is it easier to do that as rental or as ownership?
Well, I'll jump on it first, but I'm sure Don has a lot to add at Andrea. All right. I mean, and Don, development is very, very difficult. And so every time you add another element to it, becomes that much more difficult. So even doing just mixed use, as you mentioned, retail and residential, right now, the location needs to be superior. It needs to be both a good commercial location, and it needs to be a good housing location. And then now, how do those two demands coexist? And then adding, the third, if it's a standalone, affordable, or blended in. So I would think just adding another use makes the financing more complicated, makes it that much more complicated. I would think it'd have to be an exceptional use for a three-pronged project to be able to, and probably a large site, to do all three uses at once. Not that they haven't happened, but I think it has to be an exceptional location.
Okay. Council Member Hedis.
Hi, again, thank you for doing this. I'm not sure who this would be directed to, but I wanted to pursue the mixed use, but more of the work-live mixed use, particularly the type of thing that I've seen in a more urbanized setting where you might have tech or biotech space combined with small units that might suit singles or couples, but really not families. And are some of you familiar with some of those types of developments? And are those happening? What are the trends with regard to work live?
But I'll just one comment that I just happen to, I think it's very difficult. We've tried to live work and it didn't work very well, to be very candid. But there is a project in San Mateo, and I believe Windy Hill is the developer, but I might not be exactly right, where it's a commercial office building. And then on the top floor, they put, I don't know whether it's 15, 18, 20, I think as you outlined, small apartment units on the top floor. And so that's, when I think of mixed use, that's not what comes to my mind, but there's one example of where it really is primarily a downtown urban office building. And then I think because the land use supported it, and I'm not that familiar with the project, there's a level at the top of rental apartments. So there's one example.
Okay, Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. So much good information. This question is for Chris and Andrea. Is there a good size of lot? I mean, if we allocated something on a corner that just had one house on it, it doesn't sound like anything at 20 units an acre is going to work out, or maybe I'm wrong. So what size of parcel is good for 100% affordable? And I realize that might depend on what amenities already exist and where it's located.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on your product. Like if you're building for senior, you can get away with a little bit smaller because parking needs and the units themselves are smaller. But generally, I'd like to see at least a 50-unit building. And so depending on what product I'm trying to deliver, that'll kind of dictate that. And then we can sometimes, even though it's harder for Dawn, but like I said before, we can leverage other funds. So we can sometimes deliver that in a podium. But we want to stay in wood. So we might have like a first layer of concrete and then, 4 layers of wood on top.
So if I could follow up, so that sounds like if we're doing 20 units an acre, that's 2.5 acres? Or could it be smaller if you're talking senior with,
Could be smaller if you're doing senior.
okay. Did you have a different answer, Chris?
No, I concur.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Rosenberg.
Thank you. I want to go back to the question on rental versus ownership. Is it easier? I saw that the math, it sounded from what you were saying, Don, earlier, that the math works out better on rentals versus ownership. Is that because you can build smaller units, or why is it easier to do rentals and than ownership, especially as it relates to affordable housing?
Well, I think they answered the question on the affordable housing side. On the market rate side, it's it's really just a function of the rent versus what you can sell units for in a condo situation. And I would say they're roughly equal, to be honest. The trick with the for sale housing above a parking structure is it works if you get larger units. And there's a magic kind of equation. It's more of a move down program, right? Someone moving out of a single family home wants to stay in Los Gatos, doesn't want the maintenance. And so they go into a 2,000 square foot condo that has structured parking. And the mathematics that we found is it's because the larger unit, we can sell the same square footage, requires less parking. And I hate to make it that simple about making it parking. So on a for sale side, it would be larger units over a podium. Smaller units over the podium just creates more parking, and it's just harder to make the numbers work. It's easier to make that work on a rental side, if that makes sense. So it is there's mathematics that have to do with unit size and how it translates into parking in the structure.
Just if I may add, I think on the affordable side, there's the existing program with lots more resources available on the rental side. Wright County Measure A, for example, raised $1 billion. There's a state funding, there's the tax exempt bonds and the tax credit. So there's an established system to leverage local funds or local land, or even a private developer's project. So there's an established funding program to develop rental affordable housing. On the home ownership, affordable home ownership, there's just no program. So it just takes such a humongous subsidy to be able to provide an affordable home ownership unit.
I would just say, from the viewpoint of monitoring the units as well, from the public agency standpoint, monitoring resales and so forth of homes is extremely time consuming, as opposed to a rental project where you often have experienced developers who are being monitored anyway, say for tax credits or whatever. But when I worked in San Mateo, we had 2 people who were devoted to managing the city's portfolio of home ownership units, and there weren't that many. So it's a very expensive program to try to monitor if the goal is to keep the units affordable.
Okay, it looks like we're running out of questions, running out of steam. Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, I wonder if we could have a comment from Barbara about the role of the Attorney General. There's been some talk on the street about stricter enforcement of the housing laws.
Well, there's not only, let's see, HCD has a housing enforcement unit that is supposed to eventually have 25 people working for them. And they basically respond right now on a complaint basis. So if usually a developer, so if someone is unhappy with the actions of a city, they complain to HCD, and HCD will, first they write a letter of technical advice, and then if the community continues to do what they're doing, they'll write a notice of violation. And then if the community still ignores what they're doing, they have the ability to refer the case to the Attorney General. The Attorney General has, according to a press release, a strike force of 12 attorneys who are prepared to go after cities who aren't obeying housing laws. They went after one of our clients on an SB 9, accusing them of violating SB 9, which the city vigorously disputes, but it's turned into a huge political issue because the Attorney General tweets about it. And so the mayor obviously is not happy about that. So it's kind of both political and legal. The Attorney General also has the ability to hire outside law firms to prosecute these housing cases, which I think would be bad, because I think you would then end up with many of the firms representing private developers, suing cities on behalf of the Attorney General, which would really change the landscape. Anyway, so both HCD and the Attorney General have become very active in trying to prevent cities from what they perceive as violating state law.
Thank you for that response.
Okay, Commissioner Piasecki.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of quick questions, and I might point out that I'm seeing that Kylie Clark and Adam Mayer have had their hands up for a while too. So for some reason, maybe you haven't seen their hands, but we tend to hold the value of land as a constant, and this constant has been rising dramatically. At what point do the city's requirement or town's requirements impact the price of housing? If we said 40% affordable housing, take it or leave it, do the developers then go to the property owner and say, hey, your land isn't worth $10 million an acre, it's only worth 8 or 6 or 5. And I've never seen that happen, because most property owners will say, well, we'll wait until hell freezes over before we sell it for 6 or 8. The other question I have is, I don't quite understand the HCD saying, well, you should check with the property owners and see if they're willing to sell. Everybody's willing to sell for the right price. So, you go to them and they say, well, I'm not thinking about it now, but if somebody wants to give me 3 times what it's worth, sure, I'll be willing to sell. So I'm kind of curious about what they're thinking there. And then again, is there a way we can impact the value of the land? Thank you.
I can answer the second question, and I think the developers the first. On the second question, they're not looking for somebody who says, maybe they're looking for somebody who says, I have the intention to build a project here. That's what they're looking for.
Okay, I guess I have to apologize to Ms. Clark. My screen was on 2 of 2, which turns out cuts off the first three rows, columns of people. So I didn't see the top 3 people. So
no worries.
Your turn, please go ahead.
No worries, thank you. So something that I've been encountering a lot as we've had these discussions, and something that I also assume that you all encounter as you do this work, is myths about affordable housing. And so like some of these that I hear the most are that affordable housing will lower property values, that it will take the town's water, or that it won't visually fit in with the town's character. And so I was wondering which ones of these you encounter the most, and then also if you would be able to dispel some of those myths.
Chris, you want to go first, or should I?
I'd let you and Dawn go through with what you experienced in the experience with the North 40 first, I guess.
Well, I'll just generalize because it's pretty standard. I think you mentioned a lot of them. I would add traffic gets discussed a lot. And one of the things that Eden has done over the years, which I think is really helpful, is encourage people that are concerned to go and visit our properties. And a lot of times people who've lived in the community are like, oh my gosh, I thought those were high-end condos and I had no idea it was affordable housing. And lately through COVID, instead of actually organizing physical bus tours, we've organized these virtual tours where we put together like a PDF sheet and say, here are the addresses, please go drive by anytime. check it out. So I think that's a huge tool that you could use. And Affordable Housing Month is coming up in Santa Clara County. So there'll be lots of opportunities to go out and kick the tires of real life affordable housing development. So I just encourage you to share that information. SV at Home is your amazing advocacy group that I do happen to be on the board of, and they will be organizing all of that. So check that out. There's been studies about the property values, which we could certainly point you to. We often have traffic experts that will be there to talk about the data that they've run. Generally, though, there is a little bit of resistance to studies and reports as being not true, but we do still, provide them to try and have that conversation. So I think as much as we can, really showing how the work is beautiful, both the buildings, but also how it impacts families, and really personalize it and humanize it and tell the stories of the impact that the housing is making is really what we try and do.
The only thing I would add in terms of climate friendly, right? I think, many high density projects, they have all new plumbing features. So they use a lot less water than your typical average suburban single family home. We usually have solar involved. So solar to minimize electric costs, solar hot water. So I think given the new construction and the new technology that goes in, I think on average, new constructed multifamily housing, whether it's market rate or affordable, to be honest with you, is actually a much lower consumer of electricity and water than when compared to an average, single family home that's been built 40, 50 years ago.
I think, I think there's value in creating mixed income and really diverse neighborhoods. I think the population is sophisticated as this generation's getting older, and seniors want to live closer to younger people, and there's a value in a mix of income. So our outlook is there isn't really a diminishing of value by introducing affordable housing into a project like the North 40. We think it's a value.
Thank you. I completely agree.
Okay, let's go with Commissioner Mayer.
Hi, I have a quick comment and a question. The comment is in regard to the discussion about parking. And as Don mentioned earlier, it's always a challenge to accommodate parking in any high density development, whether it's a market rate housing development or affordable housing development. I know the developers are very familiar with this problem. Oh, by the way, I'm an architect and I've worked on multifamily projects, mostly up in San Francisco. And some projects I worked on in the past half decade actually utilize technology like parking stackers. So you actually have 2 or 3 cars vertically stacked on each other. And another approach that some multifamily residential developers have used up in the city, where it's obviously much higher density than Los Gatos, are tandem parking. Obviously, from kind of a logistical and management point of view, it's a bit more challenging. But I try to think of parking in multifamily buildings as car storage rather than parking, because maybe people that are living in these types of developments, aren't in their car every single day, or they don't need it every day, with the rise of work from home, or a community like the North 40 that's under construction right now, which is really, a nice mixed use community. So I would encourage the town to be kind of more open-minded to these sort of creative parking solutions to save space, basically. Question I think would be for Barbara, and it has to do with the identifying sites in the housing element for affordable housing development. As Mayor Rennie, brought up the point, the town doesn't have much land to donate for an affordable housing project, but would it be possible for, would HCD accept if the town maybe identified or with some, for some other public land that's not town land, maybe like county land, school district land, either fire department or like police. I know that's kind of town land still, but or alternatively, say like nonprofit, like religious institution property. Would HCD accept that if the town got buy-in from one of these entities to say, okay, we'd be interested in perhaps building an affordable housing development here.
Yeah, those are commonly used, but you do need to have some evidence of buy-in from the other agent, from the agency, that they're actually, willing to donate the land or willing to consider or something like that. So you do need to have that buy-in. You can't designate it without some evidence of interest from the other agency. And a lot of cities are looking at religious institutions, churches, church parking lots. Anyway, I've seen a lot of interest in that. And of course, schools. Yeah.
People wouldn't have to walk very far to pray. Save on traffic. Commissioner Jano?
Thank you. It's just been such an exciting discussion. You can get some really interesting visuals in your mind just listening to you and thinking about the projects that are possible. But I feel like we're a little bit further downstream from where we actually are in our work ahead of us for the town, those of us on the commission, and those of us on the Housing Element Advisory Board. So the question to Barbara, you mentioned at the beginning, or you spoke briefly about the penalty of not building, but I think what we need to hear about is the penalty of not planning for what we need to plan for. So if you could speak just a little bit about that, just to help us keep in perspective that this is a job that must be done, and helping the community understand that we don't have the ability to say no.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are penalties for not adopting a housing element. I think so far, I mentioned all the communities in Southern California that are delayed in adopting, but they're all working at it pretty diligently. I think the time will come, though. The HCD is authorized to refer all those to the Attorney General, and I think eventually cities will be subject to lawsuits, and not only from the Attorney General. In the past, most of the litigation regarding housing elements has come from public interest law firms. So if you don't do it, you're quite exposed to that kind of litigation. If the plaintiff wins, or even if there's a settlement agreement where you agree you're going to be paying not only your own defense costs but attorney's fees. There's a provision in the state law that if there's a court order to adopt your housing element and you still haven't done it after a year, there's a penalty of $10,000 a month that can rapidly increase to $600,000 a month. It's hard for me to think that anybody would get that far and ignore a court order, but that's another penalty built in. It's also having an inadequate housing element also exposes any other project to attack. For instance, many years ago, the city of Menlo Park hadn't adopted a housing element, I think, for about 15 years. And Facebook was going there. And so there was an attack on the Facebook project until there was an agreement by the city to complete its housing element. By the way, it's one of the few that's actually met its RHNA, its regional housing needs allocation. But in any case, yeah, there are penalties. And I think that's really where the state and HCD are focused. Also, if the city doesn't implement the housing element, you have to not only adopt the plan for the sites, but you have to do the upzoning. HCD is demanding that each of the programs have, quote, metrics and milestones. And so if they find a community isn't doing what it promised to do, they can decertify your housing element, say it no longer complies with state law, and again, refer you to the Attorney General. So there's a lot of sticks that have been added to state law in the last few years.
I know it's getting late, but this one's important, and maybe I don't want to come across as this isn't a threat, right? So our understanding of it, if you don't have a housing element in place, is that developers can then propose housing developments, and they cannot be denied based on inconsistency with your general plan or your zoning. And so essentially the town, from what we understand, loses kind of control over its process. Now to kind of get that, to make that stick, we'd probably have to go to court on that, but there are some major implications in terms of what control the town loses if you don't have the housing element in place.
Yeah, Don, thanks for mentioning that. That applies if a project has 20% of the total units as affordable to lower income households. So that is correct.
And don't worry about the time, Don. The council goes till midnight. I think we quit last night by what, 11:15? So Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I will try to make sure this doesn't go till midnight. I have a question that's most likely for Barbara, but also I'd love to hear from anyone who's heard about it or worked with it or anything. But AB 1851, also called the YIGB or Yes in God's Backyard Bill, passed, and it makes it easier for churches to build in their parking lots. And so I wanted to ask, like, if you do know about this, then how much easier does that make it for them? And also, what could we as a town do to try to use that to encourage affordable housing development?
It's been a while since I looked at that bill in any detail. It does, it basically makes it easier for the parking to be shared between the affordable housing and the church. Now, if anyone has actually used it, Andrea, if you've actually used it, I'm actually none of our clients have ever approached us with somebody who's been trying to use the bill. So I don't know how effective it was. When I read it, I thought it would be difficult to use. I mean, that was just my view as an attorney. So it does make it easier to share the parking. I'm just not aware of somebody who's used it yet. And maybe one of your the other three panelists have some experience with it.
Yeah, we were tracking some of these because we are in partnership with several churches in various communities across the Bay. And I think that one passed, but a lot of the other ones that we were keeping our eye on, which really made, housing kind of more by right or, like an allowed use on a church property, did not pass, as I understand it. So I think if you want to see kind of faith opportunities, you want to make sure that multifamily is allowed on those parcels, because right now state law does not exist to sort of give us that tool to kind of come in and say, well, your general plan doesn't say this, but we want to move it forward.
And I think actually Montessorino used a church tried to use in cycle 5, and the next election they tossed their mayor out for it. Go ahead, Commissioner Rosenberg. Yeah, go ahead. Andre, you want to say something? Or?
I was just going to say that
Barbara, yeah.
The zoning for the church was referended, and the city found another site.
Commissioner Rosenberg,
yeah. My question to all three builders would be, the process we're going to go through, or we are going through, right? We have a bunch of sites, we have to pick them. And my question is, if you guys were doing that process, what would be the top couple of key things that you would keep in mind in terms of picking the best sites, just from a builder perspective? What would you say are the top, like 2 to 3 things that really make the best site?
I'll jump in. Level sites are better than not, right? So from a geography point of view, but I would say to qualify for the affordable housing financing for rental housing, proximity to transit. So bus lines would be helpful, and proximity to amenities, right? So whether it's parks, grocery stores, so we can certainly point you in the direction, right? There's a scoring, matrix on what you need to be close to get the points to earn the funding sources. And so as much as possible, it would be ideal to be, close to those amenities that are required by the scoring programs to earn the funding sources.
Let me ask Barbara a question. This is a fear I have a little bit. You talked a lot about how much open land sites, and we don't have a lot of open land. You said 50% of them of the designated affordable more than 50 can't be on non-bare land. At some, there isn't that much bare land. So at some point, is HCD going to force us to designate things in our hillsides and our high fire zones?
Well, they'll never force you to do anything in particular. The issue is if you can find enough sites that will satisfy, where you can have enough evidence to satisfy HCD. And by the way, the sites that any lower income housing you have that's under construction at the time, as of June 30th, you can count. I don't know if the North 40 will be done by then, Don, but if it's still under construction, you can count those 50 units. Any affordable ADUs plus sites on vacant land, if you can get over 50% with those three categories, then you're not subject to this higher standard. But I think really, if you don't want to go on your hillsides, then it's really up to the city to work hard to find sites that, and the hillsides, frankly, aren't good sites for affordable housing. I think it's Chris just said. So I think you really want to try to find the sites, with more access to amenities. By the way, I'm going to have to just leave for a few minutes and change my device because this one, the battery's running down. So just let me back in.
Okay. Do we have more questions? Seems like maybe we're running out of gas. So Laurel, how should we do a wrap up?
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you all for your great questions. Thank you for the residents for the questions that Josh moderated. Thank you all to the panel members. It was a great dialogue. Josh, you did a fabulous job moderating it. Chris, Andrea, Barbara, and Don, all your expertise was really helpful. I think we are kind of getting our arms around all of the dimensions of the work that's ahead of us. And for that, we thank you. We are going to be meeting with our Housing Element Board later in the month. And I would encourage the residents who are watching to go to our Housing Element website and try and use the new tool and pick some affordable housing sites and submit them. You have an ability to provide us direct input. And maybe, Joel, if you could just remind folks where they can find that selection tool. Thank you.
Sorry, technical difficulties. So if you go to the Housing Element website, engagelosgatoshousing.com, you'll find the balancing act tool there. And so that is definitely one option. And so we would definitely encourage folks to participate in that. As Laurel mentioned, the Housing Element Advisory Board will be meeting on April 21st to have a similar conversation. Encourage Housing Element Advisory Board members to take that for a spin as well as planning commissioners and council members. As I think you've all heard tonight, this is going to be a challenging cycle. For those of you who participated in the last cycle and know how challenging that was, you can only imagine how much more difficult this will be because it's, again, over 3 times the number of units from our last cycle. And as has been mentioned multiple times, we don't have a whole lot of vacant land. So we're going to have to make sure we have solid sites and solid justification so that we can get a certified housing element through HCD. Thank you.
Dawn, did you want to have a parting words?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can talk about North 40 for years. We're going to hold a virtual coffee from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every second Wednesday of the month starting. So unless you're a planning commissioner, because I can't speak to planning commissioners, We welcome everyone dropping by for virtual coffee. The address for the coffee is at www.losgatosnorth40.com, and happy to continue the dialogue.
Okay, well, I would like to thank everybody, thank our panelists for your time, and thank all of our planning commissioners and housing element board people for their time. I know you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and the council is appreciative of all the work you're going to be doing to make it a little easier for us, right? If the council had to try to do this, we'd never get anything else done. So I think we really appreciate, all the work that you will be doing on this. So thank you. And with that, I will adjourn us. Good night.